All right, today we're digging into what might be one of history's oldest cold cases. We're putting a trial on trial, examining the legal proceedings against Jesus of Nazareth. And we're not looking at this through the lens of faith. Nope. We're looking at it strictly through the cold, hard lens of the law. Look, it's a story pretty much everyone knows, right? But underneath that familiar narrative, there's a critical question. According to the laws of its own time, was any of it actually legal? So let's get right into it. Think of this as a kind of legal review. We're going to set aside centuries of theology and just look at the facts of the case and measure them against the legal rulebook of that exact time. I mean, just think about how it all went down. You've got an arrest in a garden in the middle of the night. Then a hearing is thrown together almost immediately. And a verdict? It's all done before the sun even comes up. The speed of it all. I mean, that alone raises some serious red flags. It really makes you wonder if proper procedure was just tossed aside to get things done quickly. Okay, so if we're going to judge this trial, we need the actual rule book they were supposed to be playing by. And you know what? Lucky for us, history has preserved the key piece of evidence we need to build this case. And here it is. This is the Mishnah, specifically the part that deals with the Sanhedrin, the High Court. This thing lays out the exact rules for capital cases, cases of life and death. And it was all codified right around the time these events took place, so this is our legal gold standard. This isn't us looking back with modern eyes, this is their law. And here's what's absolutely crucial to understand about this legal system. The whole thing was designed to protect the accused. Seriously. This was not a system built for fast convictions. It had all these built-in safeguards, especially when someone's life was on the line. Things like trials had to be in daylight, witnesses had to be super consistent, there were mandatory delays. All of this was designed to stop a rush to judgment. So keep these rules in your head as we go forward. All right, so where does the prosecution's case, the Sanhedrin's case, start to fall apart? Well, let's start with the most basic thing in any legal proceeding, the timing. Okay, violation number 1. And this is a huge one. The law is crystal clear. Capital trials have to happen during the day, period. Any trial started after sunset is legally void from the very beginning. And yet, what did the sources say? This whole thing kicked off in the dead of night. And then there's violation number 2. The law strictly forbids reaching a verdict right before a Sabbath or a big festival. And this trial, it took place on the eve of Passover, one of the most important holy days of the year. There was a really good reason for this law. It was to make sure there was enough time for that required second session. Which, well, that brings us to our next problem. Yeah, this is another major legal breach. For a guilty verdict in a capital case, there had to be a kind of cooling-off period. The judges were literally supposed to go home, sleep on it, reflect, and then come back the next day to confirm their decision. But in this case, everything, from testimony to deliberation to the final sentence, it was all crammed into one single, frantic, nonstop session. Okay, so the timing was illegal on 3 different counts. But what about what actually happened inside the courtroom? Let's dig into the procedural mess here. You have to understand, the standard for witness testimony back then was unbelievably high. Witnesses were interrogated separately, and their stories had to match up on every single little detail. If there was even one contradiction, their entire testimony was thrown out. But here, the accounts we have claim that even though the witnesses' stories were all over the place and didn't agree, the court just kept going. Here's another one, a fundamental right. The right to a defense. The law was clear. The accused must have someone to speak up for them. But in this trial, Jesus was completely alone. No lawyer, no advocate, no defender. Absolutely no one was there to argue his case. And what about self-incrimination? The law explicitly banned threatening or pressuring the accused to testify against themselves. Questioning was supposed to be calm, measured. But what do we have here? We have the high priest, the judge in the case, demanding Jesus testify under a divine oath. He's basically cornering him, using this incredible religious and legal pressure to force a confession. So the case we've laid out so far is based on comparing what happened in the trial to their own legal code. But what if someone who was actually in the room made the exact same arguments? Well, our next piece of evidence is a pretty stunning testimony from a very unexpected source. Just listen to this. According to the ancient Gospel of Nicodemus, this is a direct quote from a member of the Sanhedrin itself. He's literally listing the very violations we just walked through: the trial at night, on a festival eve, without two sessions, with inconsistent witnesses, and he's right there, declaring the entire trial invalid based on their own law. I mean, this is absolutely staggering. It suggests that these legal problems aren't just something that modern historians figured out looking back. No, they were allegedly brought up at the time by an insider who basically stood up and said this whole thing is illegal, and apparently he was told to sit down and shut up for his trouble. Okay, we've looked at the law, we've looked at the events of the trial, we've even heard from someone who was supposedly an eyewitness. So let's just step back for a second and think about the final verdict on the trial itself. So when you add it all up, the sources point to more than 10 major violations of their own established Jewish law. And we're not talking about minor technicalities here. These are fundamental breaches of the entire process: the timing, the witnesses, the judge's conduct, and the basic rights of the accused. So based on this legal analysis, the conclusion seems pretty inescapable. This wasn't a trial searching for justice. It was a hearing with a conclusion that was already decided. The real goal seems to have been speed, to get a conviction and hand Jesus over to the Romans before Passover kicked off. And legally speaking, a process that's this full of errors, it isn't just a mistrial, it's basically a non-trial. It's completely void. And all of this leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. When you look at it through the cold, hard logic of its own legal system, the verdict that has echoed through 2,000 years of history was illegitimate. So my question for you is this: if a 2,000-year-old verdict was legally void from the moment it was spoken, what, if anything, does that change?